Usually I don't tend to make scripts for my videos, since I prefer to speak on what comes off the top of my head. Most of my videos in the past tend to be unscripted and for the most part unedited, with a few exceptions in the past that weren't really interesting or just didn't perform very well. When I was making this video though, I wanted to be as detailed as possible about how I approached reviewing this game. And I thought it deserved more than just a half-baked and rattled-off review of my own thoughts compared to what I've done with previous reviews of minor updates for games or my own thoughts about certain topics. This is a review covering everything, so I thought it was more important to make this a very scripted video. I only got into Forsaken recently, after the nuking of the Discord server, after all the dramas had kind of come and gone, and the only real reason I ended up giving this a try was because I've been waiting for the next update for Pillar Chase 2, which is stated to be a fairly big update, and thus it's taking a lot more time to polish. Having played Forsaken for a total time of over 2 days now, looking at about 50 hours of game time across a couple of weeks, I feel as though I have a comfortable idea of the ins and outs of the game, what I enjoy about it, and what I believe will make this game better. I've played every survivor in the game, I've gotten them all to milestone 1, I've also played every single killer in the game, I've got them to milestone 2, some of them close to milestone 3. This video is going to be a deep dive into my opinion of the current state of Forsaken and everything about the game. I'm going to be talking about the overall asymmetrical horror design, I'm going to be talking about each of the characters and how they feel, I'm going to be talking about cosmetics, I'm going to be talking about the devs' approach to content and what's been going on there. And finally, I'm going to end with my personal review of the game and how I think it compares to other asymmetrical horror games, as well as give a few suggestions on what I think can be done to make the game better. Forsaken took a new approach to the Roblox asymmetrical horror scene, and decided to go for a classic Roblox feel, with classic icons, faces, but also adding their own spin with a couple original characters to throw in the mix. Most of the characters have blocky designs or textures and lively animations to kind of back them up. The maps and locations feel similar as well, with the block-like map design and some of the builds that look like they literally could have been from the early days of Roblox. And I think it adds on to the unique direction that few other games like Forsaken have really gone in. I personally think that this direction Forsaken took is one of the biggest factors in keeping players interested in the game. Every character is recognizable, whether they're original or if they're an icon in the Roblox community. And the unique classic Roblox charm holds up many aspects of this game while also making everything feel more alive and in some cases even intense or in the moment when it comes to each round that you play. The devs have even furthered this direction with skins that also make the characters feel like classic avatars that you would have played as in the earliest days of Roblox history, with stiff movements, sound effects that feel like they were straight out of the early 2010s-ish time. And I think it really plays into the theme of this particular aspect being one of the strongest suits Forsaken has going for it, with its special dynamic and the atmosphere that separates it from many other asymmetrical horror games in the scene, especially currently. Another thing I'd like to mention in the overall aesthetic and atmosphere category is, again, just the maps. The maps are heavily grounded in this old Roblox theme, with ways that are designed to use the old textures, old locations of Roblox, while breathing new life in them that also makes them distinguishable from one another, and feels like a fresh experience compared to other renditions of similar locations with the classic Roblox take on them. There's only one or two maps, I would say, that also just aren't fun to play on. All the other maps are super fun to play on, and those one or two, it's less because of the atmosphere and more just because of gameplay, which I will touch on later on, but they are kind of one-sided. Otherwise, the maps are very balanced for both sides, and really bring the themes of this game to another level for every round you play. Even the lobby, which kind of strays away from the classic Roblox in favor of a more modern vibe, this cozy cabin, it still feels like it belongs in the Forsaken universe. It's a temporary relief from the dangers each round has, while still having this dark, ominous presence, both in and around the cabin areas. And each of the NPCs are also pretty funny, but also pretty interesting to interact with, and there's even a couple achievements in doing so. The most important part of any asymmetrical horror game is how well the devs can make the gameplay loop between the survivors and the killer tasked with hunting them down. Games that are able to master this are able to find an interwoven balance between making the killer feel powerful against the survivors with a brutal but skillful arsenal between each character, and making the survivors feel as though they have the means to fight back against this so-called fate of death with their own tools and skill expression of their own right. I think Forsaken has managed this balance in their own ways, and for being what I think to be a newer entry in the constantly evolving pit that is Roblox horror, they've done a really good job in this aspect. As of making this script, there are 10 survivors and 4 killers, each with their own abilities that they bring to the gameplay formula and skills that anybody can go and try out, except for Two Time's case, with Two Time having nothing until that rework comes out. While I would argue that some characters are far more interesting and better designed in their gameplay than others, every character still feels very unique from one another in their current state. And while not every character may be for me personally, there is a character out there for everybody to pick up and find enjoyment on, maybe even multiple depending on what you prefer. As more survivors and killers come out, I have a feeling that that's also only going to continue to improve and get better as well. When it comes to the gameplay loop as a whole, and the flow between each match that you play, I think this is another aspect that Forsaken has a very strong suit in. The game never feels like it gets dull or boring, where other games would certainly have like low points or lulls that kind of happen throughout the round, moments when you're not getting chased, there's no objectives to do, you're just kind of wandering around. Unless you are dying within the first minute of every single round, skill issue in that case, it constantly feels as though there are things to keep you engaged when it comes to completing objectives, outplaying the killers, tracking down survivors if you're the killer, constantly strategizing and making plays without feeling like overly stressed, but rather it's this exhilarating and engaging experience round after round. And I'm not the only one that thinks that. A lot of my friends also say the same thing. On one hand, killers are given kits that feel powerful, with each ability that lands giving this kind of rush to the player, whether it be this like sick combo with a chainsaw and machete from Jason, or the charging slash from Cool Kid, or the ranged blades that snare down the players as 1x1, or even trapping survivors as John Doe lumbers towards them for that free kill. On the other hand, every survivor has tools to help them evade the killer's gaze, links in their chases as they hold on to what little stamina they have left, or even aid their fellow survivors with things like more health, protection, or stunning the killer. This game rewards you for learning those inner workings and gaining more knowledge and skill. It's not just free value left and right. And not only is there a leveling system that gives some characters special milestone rewards for doing this, but also the feeling of living longer or securing more kills as a killer with each subsequent match you play until you've mastered the game. That feels amazing. And even then, when you've mastered the game, there's still always the skill of the rest of the server. So you might be put against players with the same skill as you that still makes every lobby you join, every round you play, something new. So with that being said, I want to go a little further in detail on each of the characters and talk about each of them, their implementation in Forsaken, and what makes them unique. And I'm going to start with the survivors, actually. To start, there are 3 survivors classified as survivalists, characters designed to survive, with abilities to evade the killer, extend durations, and overall be the last ones alive out of the group. The first is the default survivor, the noob. Some people believe that noob is not a good starter character for the game due to being weaker compared to other roles such as sentinels and supports, and also having less of an impact when it comes to the game flow. I don't agree with that. I believe that the noob is a great character for starters to understand how different abilities affect different parts of the game. The Cola is designed for gaining distance, but also teaches you about risk and reward of when to use it. There's a potion designed to completely disrupt abilities for the killer and overall chase flow. And there's a Ghost Burger that also just hides you from the killer as a whole. And all these abilities are useful in their own respective situations and help to give new players a good sense of the game, while players who continue to learn noob can also start learning how to string these abilities together and become a very difficult challenge for the killer to face. I think noob is a great addition to the game, both as a starter character but also just a survivalist in general, with a surprisingly high skill ceiling, that can be mastered by anyone because of those abilities being so basic level with a very interesting amount of things you can do with them. Next is 007N7, who I will refer to as 007 for the rest of the video. Another strong addition to the survivalist category, and one of my personal favorites. His ability to trick the killer and just get away with ease, especially for players who master this kit, is super funny. Having sunk a large portion of Survivor playtime into him, I've learned how to clone around line of sight, how to completely evade the killer, and just be totally unpredictable with how the clones operate, especially when using that injectability to my full advantage. And it makes tricking the killer super satisfying, super rewarding, and I can't deny, I've got a couple good laughs out of it. I don't think he's the strongest survivor by any means. I'm going to say that for pretty much all survivalists, they're not the strongest survivors in the game. But it doesn't mean that he's not a fun addition. In fact, quite the opposite. He's a very fun addition to a game, especially considering the connections to the Killer Cool Kid, which we'll get into later, and just overall brings some interesting lore and theory crafting as well for people who might be interested more in the story of the game. Lastly is Two-Time. We don't need to talk about Two-Time. No, seriously, we don't. In all seriousness, no. Two-Time was definitely deserving a rework, and seeing the changes that they're currently planning, it does seem like they're taking a much more Sentinel offensive approach to him. I think that fits him really well. Unfortunately, as it stands, Two-Time is really the only survivor I'd argue just isn't worth buying until that rework comes out, and I just don't really have much to say about them because of that. The next category of survivors is what we know as Sentinels. These are characters that are able to disrupt chase flow completely, and even stun the killer in different ways to distract the killer for as long as possible, and protect their allies when needed. Sometimes. These are characters you're likely going to see pretty much every game you end up in because of their skill expression and how fun they are, especially in the right hands where they can be total menaces to any killer that comes across them. The first Sentinel to discuss is Shedletsky, probably one of the most popular characters in the game by far, and I would say it's for good reason. Having both an easy to understand stun ability mixed with a self-sustainability makes him a great go-to pick that is easy to start learning overall Sentinel playstyle with, while having this really high skill floor when you learn how to bait killers into the stun, how to land the stun properly, and more experienced killers who are going to know how to bait out those stuns beforehand, learning how to counter that. It kind of serves as the noob of the Sentinel category, where his skill floor is very low, but his skill ceiling is also insanely high. Landing his stun attacks always feels satisfying, especially when you can get them back to back, and having the ability to be more self-reliant compared to other Sentinels makes him very enjoyable as a survivor, while not making him feel too strong or too annoying to face once you kind of have an idea as a killer of what to do against Shedletskys and good Shedletsky players. The next Sentinel, and another personal favorite pick of mine, is Guest 1337. I believe this is the definition of a Sentinel playstyle. His charge is a very fun mobility option that can serve as both a brief disruption tool for a killer as well as just a general mobility option at the cost of slowing you down afterwards. But his main power actually comes from the block and punch combo, which is basically a parry mechanic that, if you time it right, is rewarded with a very powerful, very consistent stun that killers immediately have to respect once they have a chase going. This is a character that does require a lot of patience and practice, time to learn how to parry, how to use the punch correctly, when to charge, all those things. But even just becoming a little bit competent as Guest can be enough to completely waste the killer's time and make it so the rest of the survivors are guaranteed to win just because of how much of a nuisance Guest can be with his cooldowns. It can be a little bit frustrating at times to go against, especially when multiple good Guests are in the lobby, but I also believe that this is a character that does show skill at its finest, and Guest mains are going to wear this proudly. You cannot escape them. The last Sentinel to discuss is Chance. He is the only ranged Sentinel in the game with a focus on, well, chance. Their entire kit centers around a coin flip, which gives you either a stackable weakness effect if you lose the flip, but charges up abilities with a successful flip, and these abilities are very strong but also rely on luck. Chance is able to fire a gun with a chance to backfire. He can reroll his health, for better or worse, or they can completely remove all their weakness stacks, but requires rolling 3 successful flips before you can use it. While personally being my least favorite Sentinel because of how dependent he is on the early setup for the game, I still find that a lot of people enjoy the character, and playing against Chance feels just as fun too. While having some strong abilities, the risk and reward playstyle more than makes up for what he has in the kit, and overall this character, albeit being original, is a very unique addition to the Sentinel cast and to the Forsaken cast as a whole. The final category of survivors are what I consider to kind of be the backbone of the survivor cast, and that's the supports. These characters are able to serve a more passive form of protection compared to the Sentinels through their ability to heal, apply effects to completely disrupt chases, or create deployables that completely disrupt killers' abilities and their ability to chase. Players who are able to master the support category really make the biggest impact on the game in my opinion. Although this does lead to what I consider to be some of the lowest points of not only the survivor category, but kind of the whole game, which is that killers might have to start targeting or what is known as tunneling certain players due to the supports having too much of an impact on swaying the game for one side or the other. One of these characters is Elliot. Elliot is the cheapest survivor that you can buy, and most likely one of the first characters that a player is going to end up buying because of this. Elliot, who's also who I would consider to be the strongest survivor in the game, and it's not really that close. At his maximum stats, Elliot is able to heal almost 45 HP for a survivor, and also refreshes his ability to instantly gain a very large amount of speed to just dash away to other survivors or away from the killer. Both of these have a very massive hindering effect on the killer, which means that all Elliot players are going to become a very high priority for a killer, to the point that you'll probably see a good chunk of killers just straight up tunnel Elliots out of the game. I do like the concept of a direct healer, but in its current state, even one heal means that the killer loses a large chunk of their progress on taking that player out of the game, and it leads to a massive time loss on their end, let alone having to bait out the speed boost down the line from the Elliot that healed them before even considering being able to kill that Elliot. Towards the end of the video, like I said, I'm going to give my takes on some suggestions for balancing Elliot and a couple other people, but as it stands, Elliot highlights one of the only issues I think this game has, which is an incentive for killers to strictly tunnel supports like Elliot first, due to their power over the killer, and it might make it unfun for people who want to play Elliot as kind of a main or a survivor main. The next support to talk about is Builderman. On his own, Builderman is a pretty enjoyable type of support that focuses on more indirect supports through building deployables. His sentry provides very high value with good placement that makes it difficult for the killer to chase down survivors due to its slowing effects without taking care of that sentry first. And the dispenser gives slower healing for survivors while out of chases that is great for sustaining the team if the killer can't focus down one survivor. And this kind of leads into the problem with Builderman. His entire playstyle is another instance of forcing the killer to focus down and tunnel one survivor out of the game at a time, since Builderman shines specifically when a killer's attention gets divided. This can lead to instances where the killer feels as though they have no choice but to go for Builderman or other supports early in the game, which can make some rounds just not as fun. This issue is only amplified once you have multiple Buildermen in a single round, as now the killer is forced to fight into multiple sentries, multiple dispensers, and obviously a killer can't go after all the Buildermen at once, meaning that regardless of who the killer goes after, they get free value. I don't think this is a problem as bad as having like multiple Elliots, for example, since Builderman is more of an indirect form of support, and also does have weaknesses with the longer cooldowns and being vulnerable while building. But playing as a killer into a team of Buildermen can quickly become very frustrating and very unenjoyable, and this is definitely amplified on certain killers, namely Jason. The next support, one that's been a little more recently added, was Dusakar, who I think did the direct support category much healthier than what Elliot did. His abilities are great for providing very strong protection for killers trying to tunnel, and gives some boost in favor of the survivors being tunneled, with beams that can slow down the killer or speed up the survivors depending on who's impacted. If anything, Duzakar suffers from the opposite problem of Elliot, where rather being this constant presence that must be addressed and tunneled out early, Duzakar feels like he kind of underperforms and can be saved for last due to poor chasing capabilities and having drawbacks while using abilities, which makes him slower while using them. I could see him getting some minor tweaks in the future to aid him and making him a little bit more usable, because unfortunately right now, I just don't see Duzakar being played very much, despite the value he can bring in the correct situations. And adding just one or two things I think would make him a lot more enjoyable compared to some of the other characters in the game. The latest support, and also the latest addition to the game, was Taff, the final survivor being discussed. And like Duzakar, I think in the right hands, this is a very enjoyable type of support with a indirect focus, with the ability to slow down and disorient the killer with deployable tripwires and trip mines. I also like how the counterplay for Taff isn't nearly as egregious to play into compared to Builderman, the other kind of indirect support character, whose deployables are a big nuisance to the killer and have to be addressed very quickly. Taff doesn't really have that issue. I don't play Taff as often as I used to, but I still find myself enjoying when I do get a good trip mine value and watching the killer just completely lose sense of direction. It kind of brings its own kind of satisfaction as a support player. Going forward, I kind of hope this is the direction that the devs will take when it comes to support characters, because it's just healthier for the game, but it's still rewarding for strategizing well and getting value out of. Overall, all the supports in the game are fun, for the most part, and they're very fun, very rewarding, and especially when you become skillful at them, these traits are only amplified. I do think there's a couple survivors that do need to be looked at in the future in terms of balancing, but I wouldn't say this is anything terribly detrimental, more just frustrating in certain scenarios. Their personalities also help a lot. They do have some dialogue, and they are very expressive, even through those like rigid, blocky models. And I think they've done a great job in that regard, with every interaction between fellow survivors and also between the survivors and the killers feeling fluid, alive, impactful, all these things, while still maintaining that blocky and nostalgic Roblox vibe. And I think they've done a phenomenal job at making Survivor fun. With each of the survivors out of the way, it's time to move on to the 4 killers currently in the game, with each one having a very unique playstyle from one another, which I'll talk about when we get to that character. The first killer that is unlocked by default is Jason, taking inspiration from both his presence in the source material Friday the 13th, as well as his appearance in classic games like Survive and Kill the Killers in Area 51. Jason's playstyle is entirely focused on chasing down survivors one by one, also kind of known as a rushdown playstyle, with closing the distance before delivering very strong melee attacks that can block abilities, combo, and even catch up while recovering stamina. Jason has the potential to be a devastating killer in the right hands. I've been in multiple lobbies where a good Jason player literally wipes the floor with the survivors in rapid succession. However, Jason is the only killer with a very clear downside, especially for experienced players, and that is that Jason is a strictly melee chase type killer. Jason suffers from being slowed down by survivors or having to tunnel them out, especially supports, far more than the other killers have to worry about, since he just has nothing to divide that pressure between survivors or catch up to them easily, compared to some of the other killers who do have good mobility options. Stamina conservation is an absolute must with him, and having to deal with too many supports or too many sentinels can make even the best Jason players just feel as though they can't really do much to win. Another common problem with Jason is that his hitboxes are much less avoidable than the other killers, even though they're the same size as the other killers, which kind of shocked me, to be honest, due to having less time to react to those hitboxes before they come in contact with the survivor. I personally believe that Jason does need some of his power moved away from the hitbox potential than putting him into his abilities that he can combo with in chase to get more of a satisfactory reward for landing good hits on survivors while still helping with his bigger weaknesses and not being totally countered by something like slowness, and that's something I will address later on. The next killer is Cool Kid, another very chase-oriented rushdown killer, but with a lot more expansive options than what Jason offers. He's a lot more mobile, a lot more dynamic, and his abilities are much more interesting than Jason's abilities to slash, slash, and slash slightly harder. Instead, this killer has a ranged attack, a dash to set people on fire, and even minions that can just straight up smack survivors for some free value if they aren't paying attention. I personally have the most playtime on this killer, and I love how aggressive but active Cool Kid has, bringing to the table just some really interesting plays and some really fun chases compared to any other killer in the roster right now. I would argue he's the best killer for this very reason. Not having the setbacks of Jason is really nice, and it's nowhere near as prevalent as Jason has, while also not needing setup or prediction that other killers might need to get value. He has his own skill expression though. He does have to know when to dash, how to aim projectiles, when to use the minions, but I would say that anyone picking up Cool Kid can just get good value as long as they're playing the game. The only really downside to this killer is A, just not having milestone skins to really grind for, and B, having no aura reading, which means that finding survivors can be a little bit trickier. But those milestone skins should be released in the near future, and the whole aura reading thing isn't a huge deal. So otherwise, I would say that this is the best killer for anyone wanting to play the game after they're done playing Jason, and is a very fun addition to the roster. Next is John Doe, who takes a drastic shift from the first two. Instead, John Doe is focused entirely on setup, putting survivors in tight situations before the chases even start. He has ways of blocking key areas or choke points, and finding survivors at the press of a cooldown button. For being a setup killer, he still has really good pressure and chase though. I've been able to just shrug off stuns like it was nothing due to his passive, and he's still pretty darn good in terms of getting hits in. I don't really have much of a problem with getting hits in as John Doe compared to some of the other killers in the game, and he also constantly applies his debuff to survivors that dwindles down their health without John Doe even doing anything. It's a killer that does require a little bit more skill than Jason or Cool Kid, but in the right hands, it is very rewarding, and I do have some respect for people that decide to grind him to level 100 for that reason alone. Last in the current roster is 1x1x1x1, also just known as 1x, who once again kind of takes a different direction and serves as the only truly ranged killer in the game, having two ranged abilities that go across the map and instantly hit survivors for large chunks of damage and slow down, and just straight up locking them in place, while also having the ability to track down survivors and summon minions that will interrupt survivor progress and give some pretty crucial information for where people are without really needing to constantly use your abilities to find them. 1x1 does have some clear counterplay though, with being able to bait out the ranged attacks or knowing how to predict when he's going to use certain abilities, but I also think 1x can do the same thing and predict survivor movements and be very unpredictable in the right hands. I think this is another killer who does a great job at rewarding good skill expression, but also good counterplay on survivor's end, and if anything, I think this killer is a prime example for the game on the battle of who has more skill, because a person with more skill will win this fight every time. I don't think that I'm going to be playing this killer as often as the others, but I still do enjoy the design of the character very much, both from gameplay and the narrative perspectives, and I think he fits right in for the world that Forsaken has created. With all the characters and gameplay finally out of the way, I lastly wanted to focus on personalization options and kind of some other things that this game has to offer through cosmetics, emotes, soundtrack designs, all that good stuff. I think this is another massive strong suit of the game, and this is one thing that many players are going to remember very distinctly about the game. Some of the new characters still need a couple skins to kind of catch up with some of the OGs, but every character still has a good handful, if not a very wide selection of skins that are all distinct from one another and look really good, for the most part. They even provide some special icons in the corner of the UI to showcase the skins that you put your hard-earned cash into, and I think that's just adding even more customization that is very, very nice. Some of the killer skins not only change the skin or the effects, but even the soundtracks, and my god, do these composers cook on these soundtracks. The default ones are already incredibly fitting and just straight up bangers in their own right, But my god, the skins that change some of these chase themes, or even the Last Man Standing themes, are just bangers. And there's only one or two I wouldn't say are in my own playlist. Every other one is already in my playlist. I listen to them on repeat, because my god, they're so good. I think the composers for this game literally deserve a standing ovation for how hard they cook on these skins, and will continue to do so, because even the upcoming soundtracks sound just as good, if not even better. Like, my god, the one that they were going to put for Script Builder. Holy, I'm waiting for that one to come in game. With that being said, though, there is another small issue that I think is highlighted through content in this game. And this is something that I think I'm not the only one to kind of notice, but that's how many things have already been scrapped from the game. I know many of them aren't at the fault from the devs, and I'm not blaming the devs at all for any of this. I want to make that clear. It's still hard, though, to watch, as a lot of cosmetics and emotes have already been scrapped as a result of rights being pulled from the game for one reason or another. And it almost feels like for a little bit there was kind of a trend where something cool was added to the game and then just randomly pulled a little bit later for whatever reason that might have been. One of the biggest examples I think about a lot was the Roaches 313 skin for John Doe. It had a really cool chase theme, very unique design, very unique effects, and ultimately got pulled from the owner of the Roaches ARG, which I was kind of saddened to see, since I never really got a chance to play with it. Of course, I totally respect the decision of the owner. I don't mean for this to come off as hateful or spiteful or anything like that. I just believe this is one of many instances that you can find, both in the game and like if you go on the unofficial wiki. There's a lot of instances of content being pulled throughout its lifespan from their respective owners, or things happening that's led to soundtracks being pulled or skins being pulled. And I think it's not only because of what's been going on behind the scenes, but also just certain community members that are just involved in things they shouldn't be involved in. So I do hope that going forward, some trust can be reestablished, not only in the dev team, but in the community. And hopefully things can kind of start healing from some of those more drastic things that happened in the past. Maybe one day we can even see some of these permissions come back, get those skins back. That would be awesome. Again, I don't want this to come off as being super spiteful, like, I'm never going to be able to get these skins, rah, screw you devs. I don't want it to come off like that. I just want the game to succeed, and seeing stuff like that does worry some people, for sure. So I do hope that some of that trust can be reestablished, and the Forsaken dev team can find some tranquility from some of that stuff that was going on. Overall, I think this game is an amazing take on the Roblox asymmetrical horror genre. The amount of passion that this game has, the crazy level of detail and polish put into it, and the incredible talent that the dev team, the composers, the modelers, everyone has, it makes it worthy of being this highly praised and beloved game. And I really hope that this game continues to shine on for years to come. Is it perfect? No, of course not. No game is ever going to be just perfect, just boom, nails it spot on instantly. But this game's highest points really shine brightly, and even the low points of the game and of its community have been healing, at least from what I've seen. The game even started an ARG on the side for anyone really interested in the story. I know this is kind of old, but I still want to bring it up. It ties in other Roblox games, it ties in Roblox avatars, even some outside material and some coding, which is something that I really hope they pursue at some point once kind of things start to settle down on that community side. Because it was a really unique way of telling the story in Roblox, and it had me hooked. This was one of the only times I actually wanted to complete the entire ARG on my own rather than just looking up a YouTube video, because of how compelling it was. Like, why the characters, why are they here? Who else is involved? What's leading to this count and mouse game that they're in? What is going on? That ARG was a prime example of that storytelling that would be perfect. I'd like to kind of take this final segment to also highlight a couple suggestions that I have, just to mention balancing for certain characters. This might be a hot take or two, depending on how you look at it, but I think these are things that could help with certain characters. First off, for Elliot, my recommendations are very simple. Reduce the healing by 5. Rather than being 35 health points from the pizzas by default, only heal 30. At first, this doesn't seem like much, I know, but you have to remember that his passive and the caps for having multiple Elliots on the team are percentage based, so this nerf would actually impact a lot more than you think, at least on paper, because this would go from decreasing being able to heal about 45 HP from one pizza at maximum stats to only 37.5, which would definitely change some factors of playing as Elliot. I think this would help with making the killer also feel less incentivized to have to tunnel Elliot out of the game, but would still be beneficial. Heals would still be very impactful, but not overly impactful, while being fun to still play Elliot. For Builderman, I do have a couple suggestions that could potentially work. The first one, I would say this is a lot easier to put in, but I don't know, would be that in order to prevent killers from constantly having to go out of their way to take these sentries, dispensers, all that stuff out, a system could be made where if a killer destroys a buildable, a 20 or 15 second cooldown is instantly applied so that Builderman can't just instantly rebuild a new sentry or dispenser right away. I think this would add a little bit more counterplay to Builderman. It wouldn't be overly impactful. You could still reposition sentries and dispensers before a killer can destroy it, but it also means that the killer has more of a chance to actually hunt down survivors without being interrupted all the time. The other suggestion I have is more pertaining to having multiple Buildermen in the same round. And the current system that they have is that whenever you have multiple sentries, it reduces the range before the sentries start shooting at you, meaning the killer has to be closer for it to work. I just think this is totally meaningless. I think that the way that sentries are currently placed makes this a completely meaningless nerf. So instead, my rework to this would be that rather than reducing the sentry range, you increase the cooldown for all Buildermen on the team for building sentries and dispensers by 5 seconds for every Builderman in a round. This would again just add some extra counterplay, being able to counter the ability to spam sentries and dispensers all around the map, but it wouldn't be overly punishing to the Buildermen either. For Dusakar, I think he does need some slight buffs. Personally, I think it's a very easy change, at least for right now, and if they want to look at him more down the line, sure. But my change would be that rather than adding a slowness 1 debuff on top of being slower when using the shield, I think that you should just get the base slowdown for spawn protection. You shouldn't have a random 8-second debuff on top of that just because it doesn't feel like it's very necessary to have that. This would allow for Dusakar players to use the ability with less of a risk and make it more meaningful, rather than feeling like it's a very situational use to be able to use it because of those drawbacks. Lastly, and probably the most drastic ones, is the killer, Jason. I think Jason needs some love that moves away from the uncontrollable factors of large hitboxes and no counter to slowness, and instead put a little bit more power into the abilities like other killers have. First, I would reduce the hitboxes, mostly on the primary swing and the behead ability, by like 10% at most, just to lower the chances of feeling like a survivor is getting hit unfairly. Now, the most drastic change I would say is to completely rework his combo ability, Gashing Wound. Instead of being this stationary combo attack, my suggestion is to rework it into a mobility move, where after a short windup of Jason pulling out his chainsaw, he would be able to charge forward while being able to also slowly move left or right. And if he makes contact with a survivor, he would then be able to perform that combo move with maybe a little bit less damage to compensate for it now being mobile, or would also instantly destroy a buildable that it comes into contact with, including sentries. I think this would just give Jason some sort of counterplay to the sentries that is very, very detrimental for his playstyle, and just in general other forms of slowdown, but also being balanced with skill expression, since Jason would need to be able to know when to predict survivor movements and time his ability, and survivors can counterplay just by strafing left and right. As a whole, I really hope this game succeeds. These suggestions are just things that I think are personal gripes of mine. I know other players kind of have similar gripes with some of these characters. but I just want this game to succeed. I want it to succeed as much as other asymmetrical horror games out there are. Games like Pillar Chase 2, for example, that I also talk about very frequently. After the next update, I'd like to do a similar review with Pillar Chase, and also do a little bit more Forsaken content. I might also even start doing more of these scripted videos with non-horror games out there, like Dandy's World, or other horror games as well, like maybe Pressure. I've had those on my radar for a little while. But my final ranking for this game is going to be a very solid 9 out of 10, and hopefully with a little bit more time, the game can kind of recover from that drama, recover from that issue, and get that last little 1 star they need for a perfect 10 out of 10. Because I think there's a lot to offer in this game, and there's so much potential that I'll see from this game. I hope you guys enjoyed this more scripted take compared to my usual style, which is very just off rip, like I'm doing right now for my conclusion. So if you do like this, I would love to know, either through a comment, a like, whatever the heck you want to do, just something that tells me that you like this stuff. Or if you don't like this stuff and you want me to go more off rip, tell me that too. I'm more than happy to go off rip. I love going off rip. But I do want to try more scripted stuff just as much as my unscripted stuff. So if you like one form more than the other, let me know. I'll focus more on that. Thank you so much for listening and making it all the way to the end of this. And I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day. See you later.